Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on an increasingly critical topic, the urban heat island effect and the role of trees in mitigating its impact. My name is Mandy Connery, and I'm a program coordinator for Trees San Diego. We're delighted to have you join us today as we explore how urban planning and green infrastructure can work together to create cooler and more livable communities. Today's webinar will feature two distinguished speakers who will bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the table. First, we have Veronica Furman, a California Climate Action Corps fellow working with Trees San Diego. She is a professional dedicated to solving complex urban challenges with research and data-driven solutions. Veronica's global experience in international development enhances her understanding of sustainable development, making her insights invaluable for shaping policies and strategies that integrate green spaces into urban planning to combat the effects of heat islands. And joining Veronica is Morgan Levy,
like
an assistant
corn or
professor,
whatever they sell it as, like 4 or 6 corn. How many?
an assistant professor at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the School of Global Policy and Strategy at the University of California, San Diego. Morgan is an environmental policy expert whose research with UCSD's Heat Hub uses methods from hydrology, eco-hydrology, and applied statistics to conduct data-driven, policy-relevant research. Her work connects climate to environmental and human health through water cycle processes, ensuring that solutions for urban heat islands are both effective and equitable. Together, Veronica and Morgan will provide a comprehensive overview of the urban heat island effect, its causes, and its consequences. They will also delve into the critical role that trees play in mitigating these effects, discussing both the scientific principles and the practical approaches to urban forestry. We're excited to learn from their insights. Please feel free to share your questions throughout the webinar in the chat. We will be addressing them at a Q&A session at the end of our webinar. Without further ado, let's get started. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Morgan Levy, presenting on plants and heat. Morgan, the floor is yours.
You want to use this volume or yours?
Hi, all. It's wonderful to be here today and to join you and get to talk a little bit about the research that we're conducting at UCSD as a part of the UCSD SoCal Heat Hub, and I'll explain briefly what that is. But broad overview, I'm here from the research community to talk about our research related to trees and heat. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is a very, very brief overview of an NSF-funded heat hub that we're running. And what the heat hub is it's actually a combination of a bunch of different researchers from different fields. We have groups of people working on atmosphere, land, ocean dynamics, public health, epidemiology, and environmental justice. And then I represent the component of this project that is focused on eco-hydrology, and sustainable greening. And behind all of that, we have education activities as well as community engagement activities. And that in community engagement activities and the education has brought us into cooperation with Trees San Diego, which is how we ended up here today. But the primary questions being asked by this eco-hydrology and sustainable greening component of this heat hub is what quantities and qualities of vegetation correspond to health impact relevant change in temperature. So we typically think about trees and heat, and more trees equals less heat, but therein are a lot of scientific questions that are in fact unanswered from the physics perspective as well as from an impact perspective. So I'll talk about that also very, very briefly, but in terms of the science on plants and heat, we have in the middle here a figure that represents a relatively complex system, and I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to give the basics here, and that there are actually kind of two functions related to heat that plants and trees, bushes, any kind of plant plays. The first is radiative cooling, and that's typically what we think about when we think about trees. They provide shade. So when plants shade the air and the land below their canopies, this reduces soil and land surface temperatures. It decreases sensible heat, which is the heat, it's air temperature is what you would feel in the air, as well as ground heat or the land surface temperature, the temperature of the soils in the land. On the other hand, what plants and trees also do is they provide evaporative cooling or evapotranspirative cooling. And what this means is that plants, in the process of doing photosynthesis, release water vapor as a byproduct of that biological process. So surface water on soil, plants, pavement, water bodies, that also evaporates along with the water that plants are transpiring through a byproduct of photosynthesis. And what this is this is a process, a biological process that uses heat energy, and this is typically called latent heat. So we actually have two forms of heat that are addressed or mediated by trees. One is latent heat, or the heat used to evaporate water, and the other is sensible heat, or the heat used to heat the air. And trees are this wonderful thing that we can put on the surface of the earth that takes solar energy and partitions this into these two things. The more water that gets used by trees to evaporate water, the less there is to heat the air. And so there is a trade-off. Additionally, the shade provides this other form of shade cooling, in that it's simply blocking the amount of solar radiation that's hitting the surface and hitting the air and heating it at the Earth's surface. So very complex process, but that's the overview of the science on what is happening with trees and heat. Then we can take a step back and we can look at this with data. Here, I will encourage you to focus on this red line, which represents the San Diego region. And on the left, I'm going to start over here. On this vertical axis on the left, we're looking at land surface temperatures. So the temperatures of the surface, that could be soil, pavement, grass, whatever it is. And then on the horizontal axis, and we're looking at this chart on the left here, is a measure of plant greenness. It's an index called the Enhanced Vegetation Index. Many people may have heard of an NDVI. It's a similar measure. But it's a measure of plant greenness. And the story that this chart is telling is that as we move from something that has less greenness or less green to a landscape or an area that has more green, as in the plants at this point of 0.2 might be kind of mix of soil. And then up here at 0.4, that might be heavily vegetated canopy cover of trees. We don't really get up here in the San Diego region up to the higher ranges of EVI, because that would be where you might see in like tropical regions. So within this range of 0.2 to 0.4, like less green, more green, what you see on average is a reduction, a downward trend in the temperature of the surface of the land corresponding to where that vegetation is. So less green, higher land surface temperatures, more green, lower land surface temperatures. This is urban greening. This is why we plant trees in urban spaces, is because we know that, one of the reasons we plant trees in urban spaces, we know that it reduces heat. However, there's a lot of dynamics here that are sort of embedded in this, which is what our research is about. Namely, that this is land surface temperature during the day. There's also land surface temperature at night. And the signals herein, when moving from low to high greenness, are pretty variable. So in some places at night, such as San Diego, we see plants cooling nighttime land surface temperatures, and in other places that signal's not as clear. There are other dynamics in the background here, such as air temperatures, wind, structures, the spatial arrangements of plants. But this is sort of a very surface level investigation of the data that documents heat. And this is consistent with our scientific understanding of this. Of course, there's also variation across urban areas. We're looking into that. And at the end of this, this is a component we're also looking at, which is that on the vertical axis, we're thinking about water consumption. If you move from less green to more green, less plants, more plants, greener plants, you tend to increase your water consumption, which makes sense. You're irrigating plants. The only takeaway from this, however, is that one of the hypotheses we're looking at is that, water stressed plants may in fact provide greater cooling potential than non-water stressed plants. So maintenance, irrigation, those things really matter when it comes to putting trees in green spaces. Next, I'm going to back out a little bit and just talk about our community engagement efforts as a part of the hub. And this is all the team members on our hub, not just my eco-hydrology group. are involved in community engagement as well as education efforts. So what you're seeing here is actually a presentation by a UCSD PhD student named Lainey Wicker at an education summit that was happened in the fall of 2023 that brought together a bunch of educators, K through 12 educators, and then scientists. And here what was happening is there was a discussion of how a measure of plant greenness, what I was just talking about, gets used to understand relationships between plants and heat. So here we're looking at a measure of plant greenness taken by satellites that uses the difference between the amount of non-visible near infrared light and visible red light that gets reflected by plants to say how green plants are from space. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. These are the maps that they were working with at this education summit. So on the left, you're seeing a map of the San Diego region for land surface temperatures in degrees Celsius. And on the right, you're seeing a map of NDVI, another measure of plant greenness. Both of these are satellite data sets, and they're over the full region of San Diego. And so we were working with teachers who will then pass this information on to students to sort of go through the exercise of saying, what patterns do you see? Where do you see them? And, you know, the overarching idea here being that, you know, in at least the urban San Diego region, areas that are more green do have cooler land surface temperatures, and you can zoom in and see different parts of these maps and how they relate to your own particular area. And then finally, this is a photo from a heat hub visit to a location called the Earth Lab. And this is an outdoor educational park that's adjacent to the Millennial Tech Middle School in Encanto, San Diego, part of the San Diego Unified School District. And the heat hub, we're also working on installing weather stations and eco-hydrologic monitoring stations at the Earth Lab, as well as other schools for research and also joint educational functions. And this is from the research side, this is to provide data that augments some of the satellite data that we're also using to investigate these relationships between heat and trees or vegetation, and then also water in the soils and water availability. Overall, we're using these to answer a bunch of questions about plants and heat. There are many forms of data which I've touched on, but not talked about here in this presentation: sensor data, spatial data, weather station data. Data sets tell different stories. Different user communities use different data sets for different reasons. They are compatible in some ways, not in others. To what extent these data sets speak to each other and indicate similar or different things is very important to us and our research and understanding impacts. And then additionally, there's an understanding that missing information does impact adaptation. So we do have a series of questions about interactions between plants and heat, about maintenance, about water supply, about the types of cooling that is taking place, about species of plants, about spatial patterns in plants. And that's kind of the area of scientific inquiry that we're taking in the UCSD Heat Hub, and that we're very excited to have partners like Tree San Diego talking with us, telling us about what it's like on the ground, telling us where trees are, providing us with data. And the objective of this research hub at UCSD is to create these two-directional conversations between community groups that are involved in vegetation and heat and climate change adaptation. So thank you guys for your time. And I'll turn the floor back over to the powers that be.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Morgan. That was a great foundational, groundwork for what we're about to dive into with our UHI research. Now, please help me in welcoming Veronica Furman, and she will be presenting on the impact of tree canopy on San Diego's heat islands.
Veronica, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Mandy. Thank you, Morgan. Like Mandy said, I'll be presenting the impact of tree canopy on San Diego's heat islands. This is Tree San Diego's urban heat island data collection project. So let me tell you about Tree San Diego. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to enhancing urban forest quality, density, and sustainability. Through the Urban Heat Island research, Tree San Diego explores the potential of trees in mitigating the urban heat island effect, or UHI effect. In November 2023, I began leading the UHI research project with the support of 10 Tree San Diego interns. The project aims to provide critical insights into how a strategic tree planting and maintenance can cool urban areas, fostering healthier, more resilient communities. Today, I will go over our data collection process, then I will share key findings we've discovered so far, and I will end with research applications and recommendations. So let's start by understanding UHIs. And urban heat islands, or UHIs, represent urban areas with higher air temperatures when compared to the rural surroundings. The higher temperatures are primarily a result of human activities and urban infrastructure. Climate Central, a research organization, reports that more than 50% of San Diego's population experiences temperatures at least 8 degrees Fahrenheit higher than those in rural areas, and this is due to local urbanization. The red areas on the map to the right can show areas that experience temperatures up to 13 degrees Fahrenheit higher than rural areas. And temperatures can vary within a city as well. Some areas are hotter because of heat-absorbing buildings and pavements, while others remain cooler due to trees and greenery. These local air temperature variations are known as interurban heat islands. And I also want to tell you about surface heat islands. And Morgan touched on this. And these are created by man-made surfaces like roads and rooftops, which absorb and emit more heat than natural surfaces such as grass and soil. These are different from atmospheric heat islands, which refer to the warmer air in urban areas. While both types of heat islands impact urban climates, surface heat islands are typically more intense and directly influenced by materials and structures in the urban environment. According to the United States Environmental Protection Agency, trees are an effective way to cool the environment and reduce the effects of urban heat islands. Trees and vegetation lower air temperatures through evapotranspiration, like we've already seen. Evapotranspiration combines evaporation and transpiration. Evaporation occurs when water is converted to vapor and releases into the air, cooling the environment. Transpiration happens when trees absorb water through their roots and release water vapor through their leaves, cooling the air. Trees' canopies also help reduce surface temperature and cool the air by shading. And shading protects surfaces from direct sunlight, minimizing heat gain from solar radiation. So I'm going to tell you now about the research process. So to investigate the impact of tree canopy shading specifically on cooling surface temperatures and mitigating the urban heat island effect, Tree San Diego is gathering a data set from both tree shaded, that means under the shade of a tree canopy, and unshaded locations across different neighborhoods in San Diego County. As of now, the research team has collected 338 data points between November 2023 and May 2024. The project's data collection phase involves using ArcGIS Survey 123 for survey design and data submission, and infrared thermometers for measuring surface temperatures in tree-shaded and unshaded locations. So you can see some of the tools we used, the infrared thermometer and the smartphone for the Survey 123 app, and also the tape measuring for taking specific measurements of tree traits. And our initial hypothesis is that tree canopies mitigate the UHI effect by reducing urban surface temperatures under the canopy. So the chosen research locations include parks, city sidewalks, and parking lots across various areas of San Diego, areas such as Chula Vista, East San Diego, downtown, Claremont, and La Jolla. Using our GPS services, the team mapped out data collection points to ensure comprehensive coverage of various urban settings. And you can see the map showing the different data collection points in the different neighborhoods in San Diego. So now I'm going to give you a summary of the data collected until now. And this is the data collected between November 2023 and May 2024. And we captured surface temperature reading during the morning, that's from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., midday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and afternoon from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Temperature measurements were taken in adjacent areas, in tree-shaded and unshaded locations for compatibility and to maintain the balance of the data. And you can see on the right, there's an image, and this is taken with a smartphone. One of the researchers took it, and the researcher put a cross in the tree-shaded location where he collected the data. And then you will see the other picture showing the unshaded location where he took the unshaded data. And we maintained this protocol for most of the data collection points, so we could compare them later. And the material range that we research includes asphalt, concrete, grass, dirt, and permeable pavement, each possessing unique thermal properties. And when applicable, we also recorded the color intensity of materials such as asphalt and concrete. And you can see the grayscale reference that we used and the scale going from darker to lighter, 10 representing the lighter color. We also gathered detailed tree-specific data, including canopy diameter, tree trunk diameter, estimated tree height, and tree spacing. And by tree spacing, we refer to whether trees were grouped or stood alone. This comprehensive information enabled us to discern the specific contributions of different tree characteristics to temperature reduction. We control for several global variables, such as dry bulb temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, cloud cover, canopy density in the area, and seasonality. Dry bulb temperature refers to the ambient air temperature measured by a thermometer freely exposed to the air, but shielded from radiation and moisture. We utilized temperature apps to monitor the weather condition variables. And the image gallery on the right consists of photos taken during the data collection process with the researchers' smartphones. It is a snapshot of some locations, tree canopies, and surface materials that we research. And these, like you can see, include grass, asphalt, dirt, and there's some concrete. And now I'm going to share with you some of our key findings. And our analysis of the collected data revealed compelling results, showing a 20.84% average reduction in surface temperatures in tree-shaded areas when compared to unshaded ones, with reductions reaching 25.05% at midday. Tree-shaded locations maintain cooler temperatures throughout the day, averaging 61.64 degrees Fahrenheit compared to 77 degrees Fahrenheit in unshaded locations, demonstrating a 16.23 degree Fahrenheit temperature reduction. So you can see the histograms on the right showing the distribution of tree-shaded and unshaded surface temperatures throughout the day. The biggest difference was observed at midday, with temperatures in tree shaded areas being up to 21.16 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than in unshaded locations. And this highlights the cooling effect of tree canopies. And you can see the right graph showing the surface temperatures by 1 hour time intervals. And from 11 to 3, you see the biggest difference. And this is also highlighted by the temperature differences of 21.16 degree Fahrenheit between shaded and unshaded locations at midday, which show the biggest difference. Asphalt exhibited the most significant cooling effect in tree-shaded locations. The average surface temperature for asphalt in tree-shaded locations was 65.57 degrees Fahrenheit at midday, while in unshaded areas, it rose to up to 90.72 degrees Fahrenheit. This stark difference underscores asphalt's propensity to absorb and retain heat in unshaded areas, and that is shown by the temperature differential. In unshaded locations, permeable pavement exhibited cooler surface temperatures compared to asphalt. This discovery highlights the potential efficacy of employing porous materials to alleviate the effects of surface heat islands. In contrast, natural surface materials such as grass show the most modest decrease. The analysis indicates a statistically significant difference in surface temperatures between tree-shaded and unshaded locations, supported by a t-statistics of negative 11.68. This value reflects significantly lower mean surface temperatures in tree-shaded areas with a very low probability value, suggesting a minimal likelihood of random temperature variation. And you can see the two pictures showing this is what asphalt. It was actually a data collection point taken by one of the researchers, and you see the 64.2 degree Fahrenheit under the canopy of the tree, and the other one showing the temperature going up to 98.4 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's only a couple of minutes difference between the two shots. And what the statistical analysis is saying is that the mean of the two groups are large enough, and there's a very minimal likelihood of random occurrence. We found also a significant positive linear relationship between dry bulb and surface temperatures. Specifically, in unshaded locations, surface temperature increases by approximately 1.21 degrees Fahrenheit for every 1 degree Fahrenheit increase in dry bulb temperature, holding other variables constant. In contrast, tree-shaded locations show a weaker relationship, with surface temperature increasing by approximately 0.52 degrees Fahrenheit for every 1 degree Fahrenheit increase in dry bulb temperature. This suggests that unshaded areas are more susceptible to temperature changes due to direct exposure to sunlight. Further analysis reveals a negative relationship between asphalt and concrete materials with surface material color in tree-shaded locations. However, only concrete shows a statistical significance. For concrete material, a 1-unit change in surface material color, going from darker to lighter, is associated with a decrease of approximately 4.20 degrees Fahrenheit in tree-shaded surface temperatures, holding other variables constant. And it's interesting to note that this is only in tree-shaded surface under the tree canopy, the tree canopy. So it was a very interesting finding that the tree canopy shade had an impact on the relationship between the concrete and surface material color. These findings highlight the need for additional research to uncover the underlying reasons behind these relationships and their implications for urban heat management strategies. These strategies, as we move forward, can help us create safer and more comfortable spaces in our communities. For example, by strategically planting trees in certain areas, we can improve thermal comfort in schoolyards, school campuses for students and staff. Our research indicates that surface temperature in tree-shaded locations tends to decrease with an increase in tree canopy and tree trunk diameter. However, the linear regression reveals that the relationship between surface temperature and canopy and trunk diameter are not statistically significant. This suggests that while there may be a trend, the current data is not sufficient to confirm a strong effect. So we need to collect more data and analyze it to explore these relationships and to determine if additional factors might influence the impact of tree characteristics on shaded surface temperatures. So as the study moves forward, factors to consider are leaf area index, canopy density, and canopy crown height. Collecting data on tree characteristics can help us create more efficient tree palettes for San Diego. And they will help us establish they will enable us to choose tree species that provide the most cooling effects in the city. So the initial research result underscored the crucial role of tree canopy shade in decreasing surface temperatures and the importance of tree planting strategies in urban planning decisions. The two maps to the right represent this important visually. One presents a predictive model using interpolation based on tree-shaded temperatures we collected during the study, they reach a maximum temperature of 81.5 degrees Fahrenheit. The other map shows a predictive model using interpolation as well, based on temperatures collected in unshaded areas, where the maximum temperature reached up to 114.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Many cities worldwide have recognized the urgency of mitigating the urban heat island effect and are taking measures to create healthier environments for their residents. For instance, one of them is Singapore. Singapore has implemented initiatives focusing on urban greenery, cool materials, and district cooling. The Urban Greenery Sector Initiative, part of Singapore Green Plan 2030, aims to add 1,000 hectares of green space within the next 10 to 15 years, ensuring that every resident is within a 10-minute walk of a park by 2030. The plan also includes the goal to plant 1 million more trees in the city. Research in Singapore has found that trees in a park contribute to cooler temperatures that can be felt up to 300 meters away. This effect is known as the Park Cool Island effect. And also the research in Singapore has confirmed that tree maintenance and care are essential for maximizing the cool benefits provided by healthy trees, because healthy trees provide the most significant impact on reducing and cooling the surfaces. So as we move forward, Tree San Diego should continue to explore how the different variables impact surface temperatures in shaded versus unshaded areas. This analysis will require precise measurements of tree-specific variables, such as tree canopy diameter and height, to ensure accuracy. It is also crucial to continue collecting data during the hottest seasons, like summer, as the largest temperature differences are noted on hotter days. Future research can provide comprehensive strategies to mitigate the urban heat island effect and enhance the overall thermal comfort of urban environments. It is important to develop site-specific strategies to address the unique challenges and opportunities presented by San Diego's local climate. Some of the strategies for mitigating the UHI effect in San Diego include investigating the optimal types and arrangements of tree species and vegetation to maximize cooling effects, explore various shading strategies using natural canopies, examine the effectiveness of using porous materials such as permeable pavement and maybe concrete, like we find out in the study, and reflective surfaces, including varying color intensities in urban areas when combined with tree planting initiatives. We also need to study how the design and orientation of buildings can help reduce heat accumulation, considering the interaction between buildings and surrounding trees. And finally, energy. We need to investigate energy efficient practices and renewable energy sources that can contribute to overall temperature management. So by integrating these insights into urban development strategies and ensuring proper tree care, San Diego can create a more resilient and healthier environment for its residents. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Veronica. That was a great presentation, and I feel like gave us a lot to think about in terms of urban planning within our San Diego region. And then we will also be sending an email after this to all of our participants with a link to Veronica's story map, so you can kind of dive in a little bit deeper into what we've been researching for UHI. That being said, we do have a couple of questions in the chat, and I'm going to pin you and Morgan. That way we can focus. Perfect. So the first question I have is, I believe, from Morgan. Can you give us an insight as to what do you think wildfire threat plays on replanting, global warming, and evaporative transpread?
Yeah, so I mean, in the urban context, so I'll stick with like urban heat. You know, wildfires tend to, at least in California and in the West, affect the urban fringe. So to the extent that there are, you know, are more or less well-watered vegetation in the urban fringe, that could make an area more or less susceptible to wildfire. You know, theoretically, if wildfire made its way into an urban center, obviously that would be disastrous on many fronts, but from the physical side of it, healthy green plants are less fire susceptible than our kind of dry, crispy plants. And, you know, no plants are optimal from a wildfire perspective, but that's not necessarily what any of us want for other reasons. So I would say this kind of gets into it's a little bit outside of the scope of the urban greening and the dynamics of urban greening and heat. But serve it to say plants cool, well-watered plants are less susceptible to fire. And there's an argument to understanding, you know, if urban greening efforts and tree planting efforts occur in the urban fringes, there is an argument to be made that sufficient resources actually should be made available to make that vegetation well maintained and healthy. And yeah, that would be my answer to that question.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if anyone else had questions for the chat, please feel free to add them now. We have another question for both of you. And it is, what are your recommendations for future research and urban planning strategies, specifically in regards to San Diego region?
I can let Veronica go first on this one. I can go second.
In our case, I believe it's important to use precise tools to measure tree-specific traits, able to know what tree species to choose, which ones are the better to mitigate the UHI effect. I also think it's very important to continue to collect data, especially during the hottest days, because that's when the biggest differences are more evident. And there was also a question about why I gave more emphasis to the midday, and that's because with tree canopy provides shade and they block the sunlight for infiltrating, and that is one of the mechanisms how they cool the surface. So midday, that's the time when the sun is hotter and That's why many studies concentrate in collecting data specifically between 11 and 3 p.m., but we did it throughout the whole day. So our percentages might be a little bit lower than some of the research studies out there, because we wanted to collect data for the entire day. But if you see it specifically for midday, then the average goes up.
I can go ahead. And then on top of that, those kind of measurement dimensions, I'm going to talk a little more high level, but given just our perspective of using all sorts of different data sets, so apologies for the vagueness, but I think there's kind of like 4 things that we think about that are perhaps sort of scientific gaps and or scientific questions that are also relevant to urban planning questions. One of those is sort of, there's some research on this, but it isn't necessarily specific to San Diego. It's not necessarily sort of a generalized understanding, but there is the question of which form of cooling dominates in arid regions like San Diego. And by that meaning, in an area where there are trees during a certain season, is there some dominance of either shade or evaporative cooling or transpirative cooling that dominates in an arid environment? Because there is some research suggesting that depending on the climate of the environment, East Coast versus West Coast, shading or transpirative evaporative cooling can dominate the cooling effect that vegetation supplies. And the reason that's useful for urban planning, or to understand that more specific to the San Diego region, would be this has like species implications in terms of what types of plants you might choose to put in an environment if your priority was cooling. Another important one from the research perspective, and again, specific to arid environments, is the role of water stress in the plant's capacity to cool. So again, there's a lot of scientific research documenting that, water stress plants, they transpire less, their leaves are not as green and fleshy. All of these things happen. And presumably there is some landscape scale. There's a plant scale effect that is well known, well documented in the science and in the discipline of ecohydrology. But at landscape scales, if we step back over a broad area that has plants in it, the understanding to which water stress in those plants is contributing to less capacity of those plants to cool the environment is sort of not a known thing. And again, this is relevant to urban planning reasons, because if you are going to plant a bunch of trees, and if those trees are supposed to cool, and not supplying them with sufficient amounts of water causes them to cool less than we would ideally want, or that we spent the money on it for, that would be a way in which science can kind of inform some urban planning and policy questions. Again, under the assumption that we can calculate kind of the water needs of a plant, then it becomes, in arid regions that are enacting urban forestry plans that involve planting trees or many trees, are the water supplies there? Is the infrastructure there? And then lastly, I think there are real questions that, again, have been explored to some extent in the science, but are not specific to the San Diego region, or are not generalizable to any location, about the spatial arrangement of plants. What density of plants, clustering of plants, do those have different effects on the cooling that's provided by those plants, either by way of shade or evaporation and transpiration? So those I think are kind of the research that our group at UCSD is interested in, and using a wide variety of different data collection mechanisms, satellite data, produced data like what Tree San Diego and Veronica have been collecting. All of those things can support analyses of those sorts of questions. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize the importance of tree arrangement, because that's one of the factors that contribute, that is in the research right now, and we need to understand more how tree arrangements affect the efficacy of the cooling the environment. And there's different information about what is the best arrangement. So I think we need to take it from a local perspective and really find out what is really what is a good for San Diego, depending on considering the microclimate and San Diego's climate. And that also goes into the tree species that we talked about. Morgan touched on it, and I did too, but it's really important to emphasize that too, that we need to really take a look at the density of the canopy and really understand like I mentioned too, the leaf area index, and make sure we have that really clear, so we can really make an assessment of what tree species is best for that environment specifically.
Great. Thank you so much for those really in-depth answers. And I feel like I learned a lot just from that question as well. We do have another question, and it's for both. Have you worked with other groups to replicate or extend your research in other areas, either in California or in the US? Or have you seen it be like successfully done maybe through other networks?
I don't know, Veronica, you want to go?
Well,
I can go if you want.
Sure. Well, the research we are doing at Tree San Diego is very specific to tree canopy, because we wanted to explore the effect of tree canopy on mitigating specifically surface at this time heat islands. So that's the scope of our research, and we feel that in a lot of ways we are pioneers in San Diego with this research, and actually we're very proud of it, because we're really targeting our city, and we really want to make an impact in our city and contribute to the communities in San Diego. So our findings are really, we want our findings to guide us into building better schools, maybe like some of the research that findings about concrete and how tree canopy affects the relationship between the color intensity and surface temperature. So all of that has to be together, and we need to find out the geometry of buildings, how to integrate trees. So about your question about if we have been able to, other organizations are doing the same thing, or we're being able to replicate it, I will say that in our case, we're really San Diego focused and tree focused.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Doing it first. That's great. We do have one last question. And if either of you know the answer to this, do you have the capacity to do video recordings for large areas via drone flight recordings? And I don't know if you've researched anything about that possibility for your research.
I'll just say from the general scientific research arena, yeah, like a lot of different types of sensors, including video imagery, are put on drones. And one of the members of our research team at the Heat Hub, yes, we do drone surveys. We don't necessarily just do drone surveys of like video imagery, but for example, there are drone surveys of temperature. And there can be drone surveys of other dimensions of the landscape, but certainly that is a tool that gets used in the research. And, you know, we have not employed it yet in the first year of what is our 5-year project, but that's not to say in the future it wouldn't be a part of the data that we use.
Awesome. Great. Thank you for those questions and for those answers. If we didn't have any further questions, I would just like to thank Veronica and Morgan again for speaking with us today, and also just thank you for all the amazing work you're doing for San Diego County. Much needed, and we're excited to see where your research goes after this. We do have one last little blurb to share just on the Tree San Diego side. We would love for you all to join us on October 10th for a celebration of Tree San Diego's 10 years. We're also going to be celebrating our 10,000th tree planting. So keep an eye out. We will be sending out information on that event coming up. Thank you all for participating with us, and we hope you share the knowledge you learned today about trees and the importance of trees to our local environment. Thank you, and have a great rest of your Thursday.